Hello, everyone. My name is Lainey Gary from today's General Counsel, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar presentation on why retention of knowledge and increasing employee satisfaction is essential to future profitability. Now, before we begin today's discussion, I'd like to address a few housekeeping items to help you make the most of your experience. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there are a row of icons where you'll find useful information and tools. Specifically, I'd like to bring your attention to the green resource icon. From here, you can download content resources, which we are sure you'll find of interest. Additionally, we encourage you to use the Q&A feature, which will be monitored throughout the entire program. If you have questions about the subject matter, they will be addressed during the presentation or during the Q&A session. And if your question isn't addressed today, we will follow up with you after the event. If you have a technical related question, you can also type that in the Q&A box and we'll do our best to assist you. Now, before I take you through our discussion points for today, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Joan Fox, U.S. Manager of Sales and Operations for Legal Suite. Joan, before you take a moment to share some information about yourself, I'll just let the audience know that we had a last-minute little change on being on camera. So for the audience, just a reminder, there's not going to be a need to click on the icon that will show speakers. You're just going to hear us today. And Joan, I'll let you talk a little bit about yourself, and then I will take everyone through what we're going to be covering.
Great. That sounds great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Joan Fox. I spent 15 years as a paralegal and have been with Legal Suite now for 7 years, helping corporate legal departments work on processes and then introducing how technology can support this good process. And I was planning to be on camera with you guys today, but I live in coastal Virginia, and we have a storm heading in our direction known as Ian, and we have Oceana Naval Base close by, and they are sorting the jets. And so it sounds like World War III is happening right outside of my office window. So again, thank you for joining us, and we'll get started on the subject today, which is knowledge management.
That's great. Okay, thank you, Joan. So again, the main goal, I just want to take everyone through what we're going to be covering today in our discussion. Our main goal is to provide a framework to help our audience develop a knowledge management process and what will be needed to activate this internally. We'll also discuss some of the key reasons this is more critical than ever for an organization and particularly for the legal department. And I'm sure fresh on everyone's mind is that with so many employees leaving organizations, how can you improve your employee retention? And if you can't, how can you retain their knowledge to pass along to the new employee you are onboarding?
Yes, of course. Well, retention is ideal.
So why did, Joan, so many people decide to leave their careers, much less their organizations during the past 2 years?
Well, so, I think some of that's pretty obvious. We faced a global pandemic, but in preparing for our discussion today, I did a little bit of research, and there was a survey conducted by the Conference Board, and it's a nonprofit think tank, and, basically reported some obvious things. Better pay and career advancement were top, but also an ability to work from home or anywhere were the top 3 reasons why anyone left a job during the pandemic. But the New York Times reported, according to the Department of Labor, 4.3 million workers voluntarily quit their jobs in August, and this is up from 4 million in July. This is 2022, so the Great Resignation is still a fact, and it is really expensive. I was shocked by this, actually. The cost of an employee leaving ranges from 30 to 150% of an employee's salary. It's crazy.
Yeah. That is expensive.
Very. And it's not just expensive for the organization. It really takes a toll on the employees who stay. And they end up with more of a burden because they're not only pulling double duty, but they have to train and onboard new people. And basically we know that's not the goal of an attorney or a paralegal working at a corporate legal department or in a law firm. They want to work on their law. And so it's really important to consider that.
I can see that. It seems like it kind of becomes a cycle of people are leaving or they're doing double duty, having to train new people and onboard new people.
Right. And then that actually, leads to that burnout effect, right? But the Conference Board report surveyed 1,200 workers in the U.S., and they found that flexibility is pivotal to supporting their mental health. So 7 in 10 workers asserted a flexible office work schedule or a compressed work week. That would be a policy that would benefit their mental health. And so businesses really need to take a look at something like that when they're talking about employee retention. And it's no surprise that organizations who prioritize retention efforts have highly engaged employees. And organizations who have highly engaged employees reap many benefits. And these include better mental health for your employees, happy and satisfied employees. That lowers absenteeism. You have greater employee loyalty. And so they've got skin in the game. There's buy-in. And so you get the side effects of that, better customer service, and that results in higher profitability.
Okay, so that all makes sense. So then how are some of the ways that organizations can keep people engaged?
Well, first and foremost is free them from administrative tasks. In the legal setting, I practice law. And so, I do spend a lot of time talking to legal department members, either legal ops, the GC, paralegal. A lot of times the first contact I have with an organization is a paralegal who has been tasked with taking a look at various technology tools to support the team. And I hear over and over again that people are burned out. They're not able to focus on the practice of law because they're faced with all of these administrative tasks, reporting, et cetera.
Well, it does seem like, though, administrative tasks are a reality of business.
Well, certainly. I said, but before remote work, there wasn't as much to do administratively. But now to retain employees, you must offer a remote option. So you need to be able to communicate. You need to retain this communication. And you need a way to retain the work product that you generate.
So case management then?
Yeah, well, of course. Matter case management tools are great for the management and visibility over the day-to-day cases generated by a corporation and managed by the legal department. But again, these fall short of managing knowledge, and they have limits in how communication can be managed.
Okay, I see. So then what is the best way, do you think, to tackle this? Is it to add more technology at this point?
Well, first, there's a good side and bad side to technology, and I'm going to age myself here. I've laughed with my friends, and I say all the time, I don't want to learn another system. And I always say it has to be as valuable as a TV remote control.
Joan, you're going to laugh here for a second. I just lost my link altogether.
Oh no. So technologies.
And gentlemen, so I'm going to ask you to forward while I get back on. That's never happened to me.
Okay. So I'm assuming the audience can hear me. So basically, the thought process here, the theme here, is that when I was young, I had to get up to change the TV channel on the TV. So up from the couch, step over, and take a knob and turn that station. So a remote control was the best thing. But then the remote control became so complicated. Of course it did, because you're no longer looking at NBC, ABC, and CBS. You're streaming, Game of Thrones. And so obviously things got a little more complicated. So we have to have relevant and sophisticated technology, but we have to ask first what's causing the pain. It's ironic that the remote work creates the need for more technology, and we need it to be helpful, like a TV remote. The point is sometimes the technology is not helpful, and it's certainly not helping to achieve a goal. So identify the problem, put a process in place, and then assess that technology piece, like what's going to support this process. So, in order to satisfy the employee, we've created the new work environment, right? That's a home office. And this has hastened digital fatigue. So remember what I said at the opening of the webinar, that retaining your employees is ideal, because the longer an employee stays, the longer they have to develop their expertise. And these are nuances and procedures that new hires can't yet grasp. So the longer the employee stays, the more value they provide the company. And so this loyalty actually, and the dedication, drives the business outcomes, and it drives the business to grow. So retention is the key, right?
Right. That makes sense. And it sounds like then really the knowledge management is a solution to both the issues, retention of employees and retention of the knowledge.
Exactly. And the easier you make the administrative tasks, the more time you give your employees, the more time you have to be aware. And then this provides greater job satisfaction. It's really funny because the idea of KM, knowledge management, is not new. When I started as a paralegal in 91, 92, I remember right out of school, I'm trying to put all of this information that I've learned into practice, but really it was watching the secretaries that had been at the law firm and had done this since they were 18. And then creating some of my own measures revolving around my responsibilities. So, we would have a brief that we write in response to, a decision that's made. And with that brief writing came a lot of cases and legal research. And so over time, I created a brief bank. And so then you're shepherdizing to update the cases to make sure that they're still relevant. But then it was sharing it across the firm. So everybody could benefit from this, and then they would also insert their research and their information into this bank. So a brief bank or library, right? And then the other way that I used to work with this concept revolved around our interrogatory, so discovery. So you're creating this interrogatory, you're propounding that interrogatory. Well, let's say there's an opposition to it. They are going to object. They're not going to provide an answer. So once you go through that process, compel the answer, what's the judge's decision? So all of that becomes knowledge that the next time around, we're going to ask the question a little differently. And so I had a call on Tuesday of this week with a legal ops person, and it's possible she's on the call today. And she has a small team with an enormous and varied workload. And so IP, contracts, claims, all of it. We talked about the key pain points, and communication is the biggest pain point. And she told me that for attorneys, they just waste so much time waiting through email that they really don't get to go do what they love, which is practice law. So communication, which is at the heart of knowledge management, and that's a critical consideration when you approach implementing a knowledge management system within your organization.
So you're talking about approach, then what is the best approach to take?
Well, of course. So you mentioned framework at the opening. So let's talk about that. And here, this is a flow chart, and it's 4 steps. So let's break it down so it becomes something that we can really understand. You'll hear me say often, don't take the staircase, take one step at a time. And that's how I look at this. So first and foremost, companies have multiple sources of knowledge. So the first step should be identifying these. And for this step, you need to have a sense of the flow of knowledge within your organization. As I mentioned earlier, I put together this brief bank as an initial response to a need I had. But if I had that need, clearly there were other people in the firm that had the same need, but that they also had a resource to add. And so, getting a sense of that flow is important. And, start with what exists first, and then design your KM process based on that. And I'll get to that a little later on in ways that you can kind of, again, take one step at a time. And then it's who and what brings the knowledge to your company. Where is that information stored? What does it say? And how is it shared? So who is the KM created for? And identify that source. That's your people. Your people are the first big step in your knowledge management process. So what are roles and responsibilities? So that's another big part of, again, the process that we talk about. And so now let's talk about types of knowledge. So I find what is most beneficial for legal is tactic, explicit, implicit, and declarative. So there's lots of knowledge out there, right? But let's talk about why I believe these are, really four important components. So tactic is intangible. That's that gold, and why retaining your employees is the first goal. Obviously, it's ideal because they've gained this knowledge over time, these cultural nuances within the organization and how it operates. But more than that, it can be tips and tricks. I mean, one thing in, private practice I remember is when we had cases pending, regardless of jurisdiction, we would get information about the judges. Like, is this judge friendly to this type of case that we're bringing? And if they were not friendly, then you really would work your case in such a way that would be more palatable for that particular judge. So that's that tribal tactic knowledge. And, in a legal department, it can be, what is the right clause or what is the right template to address this particular issue? You could have that template sitting in a repository for people to use, but are you directing them to why? Why are we doing this? What has an outcome been that has created the value of this? And so at any point in time, you want to be able to harvest that type of information. And so you want to be able to leave that information in a place that both the possessor of that knowledge has an easy way to leave that information, but then also a resource. So how are you gaining that? How can I access that information? So the next is explicit. And so this covers topics that are really easy to document in writing. So the how to or why. So kind of easy. And, when I came up with this concept as it revolves around our system, our technology, it was asked of me to show how we could create a help desk in our solution. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on too. But basically, this is the how to and why. Then you have implicit. And implicit is gained by taking explicit knowledge and applying it to a specific situation. It's almost like to then make it procedural. So what new thing did I learn? And will this be useful to others? And how can I explain it? So explicit could be the clause of the contract, and implicit can be how to give notice of termination. So you may have the clause, but then it's the procedural, the how. And then lastly, again, for legal departments is declarative. So this can be what, where, when. So think, for example, here, company policies. So a lot of companies manage policies differently. They have HR manages policies as it relates to employees, let's say, or finance handles policies as it revolves around like SOX. So depending on what that is. But I think the goal of any legal department, any GC, is that their knowledge of the policies is critical, and really controlling the policies and how they're distributed among the organization is the goal. They want to have that control and access. And so that's a really important piece of how a KM tool can be used in that declarative knowledge example.
So I'm finding this really interesting how you broke all this out.
Yeah, thanks. And then basically, part of the value is you're freeing people to educate themselves. You're giving them a resource. And in doing this, you eliminate admin tasks, not only of onboarding new people, but also providing repetitive advice. So let's say, for example, the NDA process. NDAs are incredibly important to an organization. You must have them in place to control risk. But it's a very boring process for a very smart lawyer to have to manage on a day-to-day basis. So being able to describe the NDA process through a help desk type of resource helps the employee. They're not having to, air quote, bother somebody, but then also having the steps in place and the resource of the accurate template to use, and that legal has signed off that this is the most current template. All of that's really important, because I've found, especially with salespeople, if they don't have it easy and they don't have it immediately, they may just download the last NDA that they used that's on their laptop. So really creating this is beneficial for the entire organization in reducing risk, but also alleviating kind of a painful task that's on legal plate. Yeah.
So we talked about the people, and we talked about the types of knowledge. So then what is the next step from your staircase approach?
Yeah, the next step is, an actual technology that will support this process, right? So you've gone through, you've identified who's going to provide the knowledge. You've identified the types that you want to retain, what's critical, and then I apologize. Then you put that technology in place. So the technology is what's going to enable the business to gather, store, organize, retrieve, update, and share, right? Those steps would be really important. So it must be simple, and it must provide a way for people to communicate and collaborate. And this would include sharing documents. It has to be like a natural language search, because everybody thinks a little differently. So some controls, maybe by way of like a drop-down pick list, but at the same time, if you want collaborators adding knowledge, it needs to be really easy for them to use. And identify who the author is or the expert providing the knowledge. And again, make sure that it can be reviewed and is the most current and applicable. So those are the really important pieces. And then basically you have then you have the outcome of the process. So it's kind of a last but not least, right? So you make all of your knowledge accessible, and building this efficient knowledge management system is key. And the difference is the use is human, and the people who nurture it and maintain it, they're your knowledge base. So they need to know how to use the system, and that's where training would come in, right? But here in this slide, outcome. So we're going to talk about this a little more later, but that document, process, checklist, clause, URL periodical. So that really makes everybody think in their mind, library. I mean, at least me, old school, right? So I think that's a really good place to start the next line of this webinar.
So it seems to me that the process what you're talking about is supported by the technology. That's right? And you said it's simple for people to use, is the most important
Absolutely.
thing. Okay. So you'll be able to go through some of these elements in terms of the organized and the storage and the sharing of the knowledge. But I thought this might be a good time to take a few questions before we kind of jump into sort of the technology that could provide the solution to everything you've been talking about. So is it okay? We've gotten a couple questions in from the audience. Is it okay if we kind of go to those real quick?
Absolutely. I think that's great.
Okay, perfect. So let me see here. This also, for everyone listening in, this is a good time if there's something we've covered thus far that you want to ask Joan about, go ahead and provide that in, and then we'll tackle a couple of them now, and then we'll go through some of the technology solutions that Joan was talking about, and then we'll see how much time we have. So here's a question that, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Actually, I was sort of thinking the same thing, that people would probably want to. So who, like there's a lot here. You talked about knowledge and capturing this and, creating this sort of thing, but who is the person, this audience member said, who is the person on the team who puts this all together? How does it get started?
Let me think about that. That's a really good question. So again, one stair at a time. I think a really good first step would be with your policies, because they exist today. And I hear this pain point a lot as it revolves around policies. And I'll use record retention policy as a great example, because that policy must be distributed. You must update that distribution because it is critical to your legal hold and litigation hold. So, start there. Look at your social media policy. Look at your sexual harassment policy. Those various policies could be the very foundation of your knowledge management tool. And again, those are not matters. Those are not cases. This is your policies. And everyone wants to be able to put their hands on a policy quickly. And because policies go through evolutions, depending on how law changes, look at data privacy laws. California putting a very specific set of laws in place. And so if you're doing business in California, you need to be aware of that. And having a way that you can maintain the policy, retire it, but keep it for reference at a later point. If in the case of a claim from an employee, if they're making a claim based upon a policy that was in place at a certain time, that policy's been improved and it's not the current policy, you're going to need to know those things. So I hope that was an answer to your question. I think that's a good place to start, is with your policies.
Okay, well, and it's funny, too, because I think that spurred another question from someone else, and actually I'm going to put this one forward because this question was, it says, I can see my team claiming they don't have time to add information into this kind of tool. How do you approach that issue? So I guess at this point, it looks like someone's saying we are trying to simplify things, and we want them to be able to, do what they were actually paid to do in terms of being lawyers. But we're also needing to tell them, right? You want to say this is actually going to help them to do that and free them up. So how do you approach that? I can see my team claiming they don't have time to add information into this kind of tool.
Okay, again, it's a great question. And so I'm going to answer this kind of in two parts. So, at the cornerstone of my role here at Legal Suite, I'm in sales. And we go to different trainings and different kinds of seminars. And I looked at the STAR approach. So it's situation, task, action, result. This is a sales process. And so you have to ask yourselves as an organization, if we don't start keeping our knowledge and distribute it and reduce these burdens on our staff, what are we risking? So if I don't take action, what do I risk? And I think that a way that this could be managed, if you have a staff that's very busy, if you do have a legal operations person, if you have a paralegal, if you have a lawyer that has an interest in this, then what you could do is they could go through whatever case management system you have and start harvesting the knowledge out of that case management system. So you may have, a case that you've managed as it relates to a claim, what was the outcome, who was the judge, where was it tried, and you could put together maybe a white paper. And that white paper could then be a resource tool. So I think that could be a way that you could start a tool like this. And I think once your staff start seeing some of the benefits, you may have more buy-in to your knowledge management system.
All right. She wrote, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Nice.
Okay. So back to here, you have these 4 quadrants. And I think we have time now for a little bit of a look at the solution itself. So do you want to take everybody through a little bit of how...
Yeah, let's stay here for just a second because I want to talk about one thing. So the idea for using what was at the time our library, that was the name of our app in the Galaxy solution, of what I evolved to knowledge management, actually came from a prospect. I was working with an IT group assigned to the legal department to help them put in place a knowledge management tool. And I have to be honest, I had to look it up because I'm like, knowledge management, that's broad. And so for this proof of concept, I'm obviously not talking about matter. I'm not talking about matter management. So I needed to be able to show 3 things. I needed to show that tribal knowledge could be tracked. And remember, this is the most difficult to capture. This is that tactic. This is that nuanced experience kind of knowledge. I needed to provide a way that they could have a help desk, and I needed to show that the tool could help with policy management. So I used my experience as a paralegal to think through how I would use our software to achieve the goal. And that's, I rebranded library to knowledge management. And so now we can talk about outcome. And I think that slide 14, we can go back there for just a second, Lainey.
Okay.
So it's the create, capture, organize, manage, reuse, share, enhance, promote. And what I want to do for the last 15, 20 minutes that we have together is just show you some slides that are snapshots of our system. And again, you can find these are other tools. I think there are other tools out there, but this is how it works in Galaxy. And it addresses these important points, and I definitely want to be able to show that. So first is people, right? Identifying your sources of knowledge. And what you're seeing is a snapshot of our directory. And you see that I'm the person at the organization that's being identified, my role or function as a paralegal, and it looks like that I'm assigned to a group, employee management group, and that at this level, at this directory space, you can retain documents. So HR, legal, finance, could add documents to the directory as it pertained to an individual, a person, lawyer, paralegal, whoever that is within the organization. And the way the system is designed very much has the confidentiality and considerations around that built into it. And so at this level, the only participants in the system who could have access to this would be the legal department users. And even then, there could be some further limitations depending on the goal of the organization for using this tool. And so I think the next piece that's important to look at, and I know you guys have never seen this before, so I'm going to talk about what this is. So if you think about a document, let's just think 40-page MSA or 13 pages of interrogatory questions or your patent documentation, whatever that is, it's a document. You can bring it to life in a solution like this. And so for knowledge management, that works the same way. You can title and you can subtitle. And there's a quick search related to title. So you can type in a lot of different things, and the solution is going to drive you towards something based upon a word in a title. It doesn't have to be explicit. It doesn't have to be tactic. It can be anything that you've chosen to title this particular piece of knowledge. So the subtitle gives the user a little more information. So this is a challenge to an NDA. So what I'm seeing is truly tactic knowledge now brought to life in a way that I can search for it located. And in our tool, there's a document management component, and it thinks very much like a lawyer or paralegal think. It is related directly to this abstract or this case that you have open before you, so this piece of knowledge. So, actually, let me go back for just a second. Let me show you some other things that you're looking at. So this system, if you look at number 3, this allows you to set up topic and subtopic. So here, let's say this is precedent. This is a tactic knowledge file. So you can see precedent and then subtopic. So you would be able to carry a lot of different types of subtopics based upon your primary precedent. And then it gives you just the user, as soon as they open this, they get a summary. So this contract best practices guide prepared by senior counsel. And then look, there's some documents and white papers that are also included. If you look to the right, you see a little blue circle. That's where the documents are located. And you download them into their native format. So,
hey,
how to set up a help. Pardon, yes.
I'm sorry, I just want to interrupt because actually a question came in, kind of a two-parter, and if you go back to that slide, I think it's really pertinent to this slide, and I have a feeling others in the one here. Okay, so the question was, A, is this searchable from multiple people, and B, is it anonymous? I'm paraphrasing the question because it was kind of long. Or is it available to everybody not anonymous, available to everybody in the organization, or is it private? Sorry, I didn't just read
that would be
question.
Entirely up to the organization. So the way that I see this as far as best practices, if you are putting something like this in place and you want your internal clients to have access to it, then you could grant them like a read-only or a view access to it. So they would not be able to edit this. They would not be able to change it, but they'd be able to download a document and they'd be able to read this resource. So that's really an important piece, right? The control over this. So you could strictly use this as an internal legal department tool. You never have to share it with your internal clients. It really depends on the way the organization wants to use it. It's incredibly flexible in that way and certainly searchable, and actually address the search capability in a few slides. So I'll get into some details about how that works. It's incredible. It's just like Google. It's so easy to find things in this application.
Okay, great. Sorry to interrupt you, but I thought that was
no, that's great. That's a great question. Do you think I answered that question?
I think so. You got a thank you, a smiley face.
Okay, awesome. And I know some of the view might be kind of small, so try to enhance as much as I can by having the little arrows. So you see the layout is the same, regardless of category or type of knowledge. So in this case, showing in a proof of concept kind of way how this would work as help desk. And so you can provide that summary. You can have topic as searchable, help desk. And then within that, you could actually do a further criteria to subtopic. So in this case, this example, POA. So that's a big pain point for healthcare. You know, you have HIPAA and you have these patient authorizations to allow somebody in the family to say, talk about their bill. So you have a lot of this particular kind of documentation passing back and forth between maybe a call center, a billing department, and legal. And so this would give your new POA agents a resource that would free up legal. They would be able to access a help desk, and then if there were follow-up questions, they would be able to send a chat directly within the application. Hey, I'm not really clear about this checklist. Can somebody get up with me and walk me through it? And so as far as privacy on that aspect goes, I think that keeping a record is really important to the legal department. And so you see at the top right-hand corner a little red disc. That's history. So each time there's interaction in this case that is edited, the system is going to keep a record of that. But if you're accessing it, it's not going to necessarily keep a record of that at this landing page. There are logs and some other technical background things going on that will record that, which, again, is always really important for the legal department to have a record and to not have to maintain it as a side job. The system's doing it. So you're just operating day to day, day in and day out, and the system's creating these metrics for you. So we talked about types of knowledge, right? If you remember declarative, for example. So this is just an example of how you could use the tool in a declarative way. And again, I think this is the very easiest way to start with building a knowledge management system is process-wise, identify the people who create the policies and then start classifying and organizing all of your policies in one place. And so in this particular case, say it's data privacy, look at that subtitle right below policy management. Then number 2, you see that you can retain a URL. So this URL would direct you to the California Attorney General's office page as it relates to this particular topic, this particular policy. And then, of course, one thing that is beneficial in our system, in the Galaxy system, is if you have a contract piece, one of the contract app that's part of your solution, or legal matter that's part of your solution, you can actually relate your policy to a matter or to a contract if it's relevant. So there's a lot of interaction between the two. And again, creating that record, because that can be really helpful for a legal department. So search, right? One of the foundations of, and I'm going to go back to the slide for just a second, one of the biggest points of outcome is the communicate, collaborate, right? And being able to find it. I know for me, that's one of the things I hate about email is trying to go back in time to find something that came in with an attached document, and it just gets so stressful. So being able to be in a system where I can find something easily, both the data field, right? So I've taken a white paper and maybe extracted information to create an abstract of it. I can search for those fields but then I can also do a native language search to find documents. So very broad and easy to use search that can get you to literally the needle in a haystack. Again, a critical part of putting a system like this in place. And so the sharing. So being able to share the document or being able to share the knowledge is a really big part of a I would say, successful knowledge management technology solution. And so being able to have that document that's attached and relates directly to the knowledge or the matter that you're referring to can be really important. And then really the database, so work product. I talked a little bit about that in my experience as a paralegal. Like for me, I wanted to leverage something I've done once. I don't want to do it again from the beginning. And so I created a letter to clients whenever we would have a deposition. And that letter had a lot of additions over the years of being a paralegal, including things like, when you show up for this deposition, please don't be chewing gum. When you show up for this deposition, please be wearing something you'd wear to church. It was really funny, but I shared that letter to the other paralegals in the organization that were communicating with clients. And so I created a template. And each time I generated it, all I changed was the address and the name of the person that was receiving it, because the body of that document, 3-page letter, stayed the same. And so in this tool, in KM, you actually can create templates that can be generated by your legal department staff, but then also, if you elected to, you could include internal clients in that self-service type of work product access. And I think I used NDA as an example, but certainly POAs in that medical space could operate that way. And so they generate that document. You get a notification that it's happened, so you can be sure that they're coming back to you with a fully executed copy of that document that you can now retain. So really that's, I would say, a nice, succinct review of how KM can be supported using a technology tool. But I'm going to go back to this, and this is really important. The process must be sound. You can't just throw technology at a bad process and expect a great outcome. So again, I think there's many ways to approach KM, and the one you select for your company will honestly depend on the culture and structure and your existing processes. But part of what I try to do when I'm working with an organization is help them design some of that before they implement the technology to back it up. So are there any other questions?
Yeah, actually, I want to just chime in here because I just want to say thank you for bringing this. You kind of educated our audience about this topic, and I know I found that very interesting. And then I liked how you kind of showed how your product could solve this problem, but really there was a lot of education here. I think everybody's really going to appreciate it. I saved this one question that I think is probably on everybody's minds, and then really we'll wrap up. So what's the cost base of this? You know, is this going to be expensive as something to consider, or is it something that companies really should consider because of, ultimately tying it back to sort of the profitability, sort of tying in the profitability of lost knowledge, of lost employees, of retaining employees, but then you have to consider profitability in terms of implementing this tool. So do you have any comments on that before we wrap up?
Sure. So again, what do you risk if you don't take action to create a better work environment for your most valuable asset, frankly, your staff, your attorneys and paralegals who have weathered the storm with you and have shown their loyalty, and they're overwhelmed by the administrative stuff. And so really starting to harvest and maintain their knowledge, alleviating the administrative, repetitive tasks. I think those two factors alone provide a return on investment when you're talking about getting into a knowledge management tool. And I know for Legal Suite, this is really an inexpensive cost to introduce an organization to really like a case or a field-based data tool, a way that you start tracking your information, not just in a document drive, but really bringing that document to life in a way that can be, useful to others.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate this. I'm going to use this time right now just to kind of say thank you to you and say thank you to our audience. I'm going to just leave everybody with a few reminders to go to the resource icon. And if you have any questions directly for Joan, you can reach out to her or you can respond to us and we'll forward the information to her. Everybody who attended today will receive a link for on-demand viewing. So I know it's a lot of information to take in. And if folks are watching this on demand who registered and weren't able to attend today, or future people who are listening in for the first time from on-demand viewing, again, feel free to reach out for us and we can put you in touch with Joan, or you can reach out to Joan directly. So Joan, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate everybody attending today and wish everybody a great rest of your day and a lovely weekend. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.